Have you ever said something and instantly regretted it? Maybe it was small, a quick reaction, a phrase you've heard 1,000 times, but the moment it left your mouth, you felt it chip away at something. Your presence, your credibility, your power. Here's the truth. Intelligent men don't just think before they speak. They know when not to speak at all. Because wisdom isn't about saying more. It's about saying what matters and knowing when silence speaks louder. Today, we're talking about the 7 phrases that wise men avoid, not because they're afraid to speak, but because they understand how a single sentence can reveal too much about your ego, your insecurities, or your lack of self-mastery. These aren't just casual phrases. They're verbal habits that quietly sabotage how others see you and how you see yourself. Sometimes the smartest thing a man can say is nothing at all. Let's begin. When we talk about intelligence, most people think of big words, impressive answers, the man who always knows what to say. But Stoic wisdom teaches something different. True intelligence doesn't need to prove itself. It shows up in how you carry yourself, especially in what you choose not to say. A truly wise man doesn't speak to impress. He speaks to impact, and more often than not, his silence carries more weight than someone else's speech. The Stoics believed that mastery begins with mastering the self, and one of the first signs of that mastery is knowing how to control your tongue, when to speak, and when to hold it. That's what this video is about. Today, we'll explore 7 common phrases, things many of us say without thinking, but that slowly weaken our presence, our peace, and our credibility. These aren't phrases that make you look dumb. They're worse. They make you look disconnected from your own power. We'll break each one down, and more importantly, I'll show you what to say instead, using Stoic thinking, emotional clarity, and quiet strength. Because when a man speaks with discipline, he doesn't need to raise his voice, to raise his influence. Let's begin with the first phrase. How often have you heard someone say, "Yeah, I already know that"? Or maybe, you've caught yourself saying it too. It sounds harmless, even smart, but there's a subtle danger buried in that phrase. Because when we say, "I already know that," we're not just responding. We're cutting off the chance to learn something deeper. I remember a moment that still stings a little. Years ago, I was being coached by a man far more experienced than me, calm, sharp, and quiet, in a way that made every word count. He was explaining a process I thought I had mastered. Without thinking, I cut him off. "Yeah, I know that already." He didn't argue. He didn't correct me. He just stopped, looked at me for a second, not angry, just disappointed, and moved on. Later that night, it hit me. I didn't just interrupt him. I blocked myself from hearing what he saw, nuances I hadn't lived long enough to notice, insights that don't show up in manuals, only in experience. That moment taught me something Stoicism makes crystal clear. You cannot learn anything when you think you already know everything. Marcus Aurelius, saying, "I already know," doesn't show intelligence. It shows ego, wrapped in the costume of competence. Because knowledge isn't a trophy you win once and place on a shelf. It's a river always flowing, always shifting. You can step in the same spot twice, but the water is never the same. The wisest men I've known, they listen, even when they've heard it before, even when they're experts. Not because they doubt themselves, but because they know that listening reveals more than interrupting ever could. So next time you're tempted to shut the door with, "I already know that," open it instead. Say, "Maybe I've heard this, but I want to hear your take." That shift in posture, that's the difference between arrogance and actual intelligence. And in the Stoic world, that's called mastery of self. There's a phrase that shuts more doors than failure ever could. That's impossible. It sounds logical, mature even, like a voice of reason keeping things realistic. But in truth, it often hides something deeper: fear. I once worked under a man who carried himself like a war general, sharp mind, impeccable posture, and decades of experience. But whenever someone brought up a bold new idea, a new strategy, a risk, a different path, he'd shut it down instantly with the same two words: "That's impossible." At first, I thought it was discipline, but over time, I realized he wasn't protecting the company. He was protecting himself from discomfort, uncertainty, and the chance of being wrong. And that's when I learned about something I now call the impossibility reflex. It's when your brain, trained by past failures or fear of looking foolish, automatically slaps a no on the door of something unfamiliar. Not because it can't be done, but because you're afraid to find out if it could. The Stoics saw this clearly. The obstacle is not the problem. It's our perception of the obstacle that defeats us. Marcus Aurelius: when we say, "That's impossible," we're not making a statement about the world. We're making a statement about our own limits. We're declaring defeat before the challenge has even begun. But the wise man, he replaces that reflex with something else. He says, "Let's test the boundary," not out of blind optimism, but because he knows the mind exaggerates the size of the wall when all that's needed is one small step forward. I learned this the hard way on a project that looked doomed from day one. Tight budget, inexperienced team, no time. Everything in me wanted to say, "We're not ready. This won't work." But instead, I asked, "What's the next step I can take today?" That one question changed everything. Not because we found a miracle, but because we refused to freeze. And that's the Stoic path. Not reckless hope, but calm, disciplined action, even when the odds aren't in your favor. Because what often feels impossible is just unfamiliar, until someone has the courage to try. Few sentences feel more instinctive, especially when something falls apart, than saying, "That's not my fault." It's a reflex. It protects the ego. It draws a clear line. This happened, but don't look at me. And on the surface, it might even be true. Maybe it really wasn't your fault. But here's what Stoic wisdom makes painfully clear. The moment you push away all responsibility, you also give away all power. I once watched a colleague lose a major client. His explanation? They were unreasonable. The timing was off. The team didn't deliver. He wasn't lying, but he was missing the one truth that could have helped him grow. What part of this could I have handled differently? And because he never asked that question, he stayed stuck, repeating the same mistakes, telling the same story. The Stoics teach us that responsibility isn't about guilt. It's about agency. You don't accept blame to beat yourself up. You do it to get back in motion. It's not what happens to you, but how you respond that matters. Epictetus, saying, "That's not my fault," keeps you waiting for someone else to fix it, to apologize, to make it right. But asking instead, "What can I do next to make this better?" puts the power back where it belongs, in your hands. It might be a small thing, owning a missed detail, admitting your communication wasn't clear, offering a new solution. But that one act of responsibility, no matter how small, shifts your posture from reactive to strategic. And that shift, that's what builds real trust with others and with yourself, because anyone can point fingers. But intelligent men, they point inward first and move forward from there. It's one of the most dangerous lies a man can tell himself. I don't need any help. It sounds noble, strong, even admirable. We live in a culture that celebrates the self-made man, the one who grits his teeth, carries the weight alone, and never complains. But beneath that image is something the Stoics would see for what it truly is: pride in disguise. This is what I call the isolation delusion, the belief that self-reliance must be absolute, that asking for help is weakness, that struggling in silence is strength. But here's the truth. Isolation doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you quieter until you break. History tells a different story. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the world at the time, didn't pretend to have all the answers. In Meditations, he listed the names of the people who shaped him, his mentors, his teachers, even the people whose flaws taught him patience. The strongest men ask, "Ibel," not because they're weak, but because they're wise enough to know they can't see everything from their own angle. I remember a time when I tried to carry everything myself: work, family, internal pressure to be the rock. I told myself, I've got this. But the truth? It was having me. It wasn't until I finally said, I need help, that everything shifted. And what I got wasn't judgment. It was connection, relief, a sense that I didn't have to survive alone anymore. The Stoics believed we are designed to live in cooperation, to contribute, yes, but also to receive, not from weakness, but from strength that's honest enough to be human. So the next time that voice says, don't ask, you'll look weak, answer back with the stronger truth. Even emperors asked for help. So can I. Because courage isn't just in standing alone. It's in knowing when to reach out and when to let someone stand with you. One of the most damaging lies a man can whisper to himself is, I'm too old for that. It doesn't always sound bitter. Sometimes it comes out as a joke. Sometimes a quiet sigh. But underneath it lives something dangerous. A belief that life has already passed you by. That your greatest work is already behind you. That there's nothing left to chase, only to remember. But that belief, it's not truth. It's surrender in disguise. I once read the story of Harry Bernstein, a man who waited nearly a lifetime to do what he truly loved. He was 93 when he sat down to write his first book. Not a blog post, not a journal, a full memoir. The Invisible Wall. It told the story of his childhood in a poor English town, divided by religion and prejudice. Publishers rejected it again and again. But at age 96, it was finally released, and it became a quiet, global success. He went on to write 3 more books, each filled with the wisdom and clarity that only a long life could give. Harry's story didn't just challenge the idea of being too old. It destroyed it. Because the truth is this, it's not age that closes the door. It's the moment you decide your time has passed. The Stoics saw life not in terms of years, but in purpose. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Death smiles at us all, but all a man can do is smile back." And meaning, as long as you're breathing, your duty is to live fully and virtuously. Growth doesn't stop with age. In fact, the deepest kind, clarity, humility, courage, ripens with time. I've seen men in their 60s start businesses. I've seen grandmothers become artists. And I've seen others much younger who act like their time is over because they stopped believing in what's still possible. The difference isn't age, it's mindset. So next time that thought shows up, I'm too old for that, ask a better question. What haven't I created yet? Simply because I told myself it's too late. Because you're not done. Not as long as you're here. Not as long as you still feel a spark for something that matters. And that spark, it's not youth, it's life. There's a phrase that feels harmless, maybe even responsible. It makes you feel like you're still in control. I'll do it later. But what most people don't realize is, later is where your most meaningful intentions go to die. We tell ourselves we'll call that person tomorrow, start the project next week, apologize when the moment feels right, spend time with loved ones when things slow down. But later never has a fixed date, and most of the time it becomes never. I once knew a man named Thomas. He was successful by every external measure. Thriving business, a home, respect, but always busy. His father, now older, would ask to go fishing, just the two of them. Thomas always said, "Soon. Work's just crazy right now. We'll go next month." That month never came. One day, his father passed suddenly. And what Thomas was left with wasn't regret over what he did. It was pain from all the things he kept meaning to do. He later told me, "My phone was full of drafts I never sent. My heart was full of words I never said." That's the danger of what I call the later loop. It's when you delay action, convincing yourself it's temporary. But the loop keeps repeating until reality forces it to end. The Stoics were brutal in their honesty about time. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think, not to scare us, but to wake us up, because time doesn't warn you when it's running out. It just runs out. And what you delay today might be the very thing you never get the chance to do again." So here's the alternative. Don't wait for the perfect time. Just give it 5 minutes. Now, call, write, begin. Even a single step is stronger than 1,000 postponed intentions. Just 5 minutes now beats 5 hours never, because life isn't built on what you plan to do. It's built on what you actually start. And starting, especially when it feels inconvenient, is a practice of discipline, courage, and inner power. The kind the Stoics lived by. The kind that leads to a life without regret. There's a phrase that sounds like self-awareness, but underneath, it quietly locks the door on growth. That's just how I am. It feels like a statement of truth, an acceptance of one's nature. But often, it's not acceptance. It's avoidance. Avoidance of change. Avoidance of responsibility. Avoidance of becoming more than who you've been. This is what I call the identity freeze. It's when someone uses personality as a shield. They say they're blunt when they're just unwilling to communicate kindly. They say they're not emotional when they're simply afraid of being vulnerable. They say, "That's just who I've always been," as if that excuses everything they could become. But the Stoics, they never believed identity was fixed. Epictetus wrote, "It's not the events that disturb us, but our judgments about them." The same applies to self-perception. It's not who we are that limits us. It's the story we tell ourselves about who we're allowed to be. Change is hard. It requires looking in the mirror and saying, "I might have been this way for years, but I don't have to stay here." That's not weakness. That's moral courage. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, spent his entire life journaling about his flaws, his impatience, his ego, not to justify them, but to hold himself accountable to a higher standard. Because self-mastery isn't about loving who you are and staying there. It's about respecting yourself enough to evolve. So the next time you feel the urge to say, "That's just how I am," pause. Ask yourself, is this truly me, or just who I've been afraid to outgrow? And then replace the sentence with something more powerful. This is who I've been, but not who I have to stay. Because the man who refuses to change is already falling behind. But the man who leans into discomfort, who rewrites himself when needed, who views growth as a lifelong discipline, That man is dangerous in the best way possible. That man is stoic. Let's end with what matters most. Every phrase we covered today, "I already know that," "That's impossible," "I'll do it later," they seem small, casual, almost harmless. But the truth is, each time you choose not to say them, you're not just avoiding a bad habit, you're stepping into a higher version of yourself. Intelligent men don't just know what to say. They know when silence protects their power. This isn't about being perfect. It's about becoming precise, refining the way you think, speak, and move through the world, one moment at a time, because your words shape your presence. And what you stop saying might just be what starts to define you. So if today's video made you reflect even a little, drop the word clarity in the comments. Let it be your quiet commitment to speaking less, meaning more, and growing forward. And when you're ready for your next step, watch next. Why silence is power. The psychology of a stoic leader. Keep going. Not toward perfection, but toward presence. Because that's where real strength begins.